With nowhere to shelter, Widow moves into a tree, and what she finds there changes everything. Rebecca Mitchell trembled as she held little Nathan against her chest, watching her 4 other children who followed her along the dirt road. The bailiff had removed them all from the house just 3 hours ago, and now she had nowhere to go with the 5 children. "Mom, where are we going to sleep tonight?" asked Emily, the eldest at 10 years old, carrying a bag with the few clothes they had managed to grab. Rebecca swallowed the sob that wanted to escape. She couldn't show despair in front of the children. The bank had foreclosed on the house after she failed to make the payments, since Michael, her husband, had passed away 7 months ago, a victim of a work accident. The insurance that was supposed to help the family never came, lost in bureaucracies she couldn't understand. "We'll find a place, my loves. Mommy will figure something out," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel, 8 years old, tugged at her brown skirt. "Mom, Christopher is hungry." She looked at her 5-year-old son, who walked in silence, and at Sophia, 6, who was whimpering softly. Baby Nathan made little noises in her arms, searching for her breast to nurse. Rebecca knew she needed to find shelter before nightfall. Her sister Grace had refused to take them in, claiming her house was already too full. The neighbors averted their eyes when she passed, some whispering comments about how a woman alone couldn't manage so many children. Shame burned in her chest, but desperation was greater. They walked along the road that skirted the small town of St. Rita Hills in Kentucky until they reached the woods where Rebecca had played as a child. She remembered the great century-old fig tree with a natural hollow in its trunk, large enough to shelter a person. Perhaps they could stay there for a few days, until she could get work and a place to live. "Children, let's go into the woods. Mommy knows a place where we can rest," she said, trying to sound confident. The path between the trees was damp with the evening dew. Moss covered rocks and trunks, creating a green, slippery carpet. Emily held Sophia's hand, while Daniel looked after Christopher. The dense vegetation filtered the last rays of sunlight, creating dancing shadows on the ground. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. When they reached the fig tree, Rebecca felt her heart tighten. The tree was even more impressive than she remembered. Its trunk was over 3 meters in diameter, and the natural opening looked like a secret door carved by nature. Thick branches stretched in all directions, creating a natural roof of green leaves. "Look what a beautiful house nature made for us," she said to the children, forcing enthusiasm into her voice. Emily looked suspiciously at the dark hole in the trunk. "Are we going to live in here, Mom?" "Just for a few days, honey, until Mommy gets money to rent a brand new house." Daniel was the first to venture inside the tree. The interior space was surprisingly spacious, with smooth walls formed by the trunk's natural growth. Small beams of light entered through cracks in the bark, illuminating the space with a soft, golden light. "It's even cozy," commented Sophia, ever the optimist. Rebecca explored the interior carefully, checking for any dangerous animals. At the back of the natural cavity, the floor was covered with a thick layer of dry leaves accumulated over the years. It was then that she noticed something strange under the leaves. While the children settled in and played with twigs and pebbles, she began to remove the old leaves with her hands. Her nails, already quite damaged from heavy domestic work, scratched against something metallic buried beneath the layer of vegetation. "What could this be?" she murmured to herself. She dug more carefully and found a rusty metal box about the size of a shoebox. It was heavy and locked with a small padlock, already corroded by time. She shook it gently and heard the sound of papers and small objects moving inside. Emily approached, curious. "What did you find, Mum?" "I don't know yet, honey. Someone must have hidden this here a long time ago." The padlock came apart easily when she pulled it, corroded by moisture and time. Inside the box, she found documents yellowed with age, old black and white photographs, and a small, ornate key. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the first paper. It was a land deed dated 1943, in the name of Joseph Mitchell. The surname made her blood run cold. Mitchell was her maternal grandmother's maiden name, Helen Mitchell. With her heart racing, she examined other documents. There were birth certificates, a will, and even a rudimentary hand-drawn map. Joseph Mitchell, she read aloud, trying to connect the information in her mind. Her grandmother Helen had died when Rebecca was only 12, but she vaguely remembered stories about family lands that had been lost mysteriously. Her grandmother always spoke bitterly about a dishonest lawyer who had cheated her father, but Rebecca had never paid much attention, being too young. While breastfeeding Nathan and with the other children dozing against the walls of the tree, she examined each document carefully. The will was clear. Joseph Mitchell, her great-grandfather, had left all his lands to his descendants, with specific instructions that they were never to be sold, only passed down from generation to generation. According to the documents, those lands included not only the wooded area where they were, but also a good portion of what was now the center of St. Rita Hills. The value today would be incalculable. But how had the lands ended up in the hands of others? A handwritten letter signed by her great-grandmother, Joan Mitchell, clarified everything. It denounced a lawyer named Octavius Harrison, who had forged a sale of the lands shortly after Joseph Mitchell's passing. The letter was addressed to the prosecutor of the time, but apparently had never been delivered. "My God," whispered Rebecca, feeling a mix of hope and outrage. Her family had been robbed, and she was living as a pauper on lands that should rightfully be hers. The irony of the situation was too cruel. There she was, sheltering her children inside a tree, growing on soil that belonged to her own lineage. Night fell quickly in the woods. Rebecca settled the children to sleep, using the few blankets she had managed to bring. The space inside the tree was damp and cold, but it protected them from the wind. She herself could barely sleep, turning the documents over and over in her mind. In the morning, after breastfeeding Nathan and giving the other children the last crackers left in her bag, Rebecca made a decision. "Emily, you're going to look after your siblings for a few hours. Mommy needs to go into town to take care of something important." "What is it, Mum?" "Something that could change our lives forever, honey." She walked to St. Rita Hills, carrying the box of documents. Her simple clothes and the fact she hadn't bathed since the day before made her feel out of place as she entered the town's notary office. The clerk, a middle-aged man named Gerald, looked at her with disdain. "How can I help you?" he asked, not bothering to hide his impatience. "I need to check the status of some land. I have old documents here." He examined the papers with an expression of someone who didn't take the situation seriously. However, as he read on, his expression changed completely. She took the documents to another, older employee, and the two spoke in whispers, casting admiring glances at Rebecca. "Ma'am, these documents appear to be authentic, but I'll need to do a more detailed verification. Can you come back tomorrow?" "Yes, I can. But tell me one thing. If these papers are correct, what does that mean?" Gerald scratched his head. "It means you could be the legitimate owner of a considerable part of this town, ma'am, but you'll need a lawyer to start the repossession process. The problem was that Rebecca didn't have money to feed her children properly, let alone hire a lawyer. She left the notary's office with her mind buzzing with possibilities and obstacles. On the way back to the woods, she stopped at Mr. Benedict's bakery, a man she'd known since childhood. "Mr. Benedict, would you have any work for me? I need a job urgently." "Rebecca, my dear, I heard about what happened to you all. What a difficult situation. Look, I can give you some cleaning work here at the bakery. It's not much, but it helps with some money." "I'll take anything, Mr. Benedict. Thank you so much." "And the children? Where are they staying?" Rebecca hesitated. She couldn't tell the truth about the tree, or she risked losing custody of her children. "We're staying with an acquaintance for a few days." During the following weeks, she established a painful routine. She woke before dawn, walked to town to work at the bakery, returned in the afternoon to care for her children and check if they were okay. Emily, only 10 years old, took on adult responsibilities, caring for her younger siblings with a maturity that broke Rebecca's heart. Life inside the tree was a constant challenge. When it rained, the humidity increased and the ground became muddy. The children began to have constant coughs, and Nathan developed a rash that wouldn't improve due to the lack of proper hygiene conditions. It was during one of these difficult afternoons that Mrs. Dorothy, a retired nurse who took walks in the woods, discovered the family's situation. She was about 65, with graying hair tied in a simple bun and kind eyes that reflected decades of experience caring for people. "Good heavens," she exclaimed, upon seeing the children emerging from the tree trunk. "Are you living in here?" Rebecca felt her world collapse. If that woman reported her situation to the authorities, she would lose her children to Child Protective Services. "Please, Ma'am, don't tell anyone. I have nowhere to go with them. It's only temporary until I can get a house." Mrs. Dorothy approached and examined the children with a professional eye. "Child, you can't raise 5 children inside a tree. They'll get seriously ill." I know, but I have no choice. Please, don't report me." Something in Rebecca's desperate expression touched the nurse's heart. Instead of scolding, she crouched down to be at the children's level. "What are your names?" "Emily, Ma'am. These are my brothers and sisters, Daniel, Sophia, Christopher, and baby Nathan," replied the girl, always polite. "And why are you here in the woods?" "The man from the bank took us from our house because Mom couldn't pay after Dad left," Daniel explained simply. Mrs. Dorothy felt a tightness in her chest. She knew that situation well. She had cared for many families in similar circumstances throughout her career. "Rebecca, is that true? You lost your home?" "I lost everything, Mom. My husband died in a work accident. The insurance never came through. I couldn't pay for the house alone. I have no family who can help us, and I don't want my children to be taken from me." The nurse thought for a few moments, observing the baby in Rebecca's arms and the other children looking at her expectantly. "Look, I can't leave you here. It's getting cold already and these children will catch pneumonia. But I'm not going to report you either. We'll figure something out." "What do you mean, ma'am?" "First, I'm taking you all to my house tonight. You need a hot bath and a decent meal. Then we'll see what to do." Rebecca hesitated. She wasn't used to depending on the kindness of strangers, and her dignity had already been bruised enough. "I can't accept that, ma'am. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." "Child, it's not a matter of kindness. It's a matter of humanity. I've been a nurse for 40 years. I've seen a lot of suffering in this world, and I know when someone truly needs help." Emily tugged at her mother's skirt. "Mum, please. Christopher has a bad cough and Sophia has had a fever since yesterday." Rebecca looked at her 6-year-old daughter, who really did look worn out, and felt her heart break. Her stubbornness was putting her children's health at risk. "All right. But just for one night." Mrs. Dorothy smiled. "Of course, just for one night." The nurse's house was simple but cozy, with well-kept old furniture and family photographs on the walls. She prepared a simple but nutritious dinner, and Rebecca watched her children eat with an appetite she hadn't seen in weeks. After the hot bath, while the children slept soundly for the first time in a long while, Rebecca told Mrs. Dorothy about the documents found in the tree. "Are you sure these papers are real?" asked the nurse, examining the documents carefully. "The man at the records office said they look authentic, but I would need a lawyer to make the claim, and I don't have money for that." "Do you know who the current owners of that land are?" "I haven't looked into that yet. Why?" Mrs. Dorothy was silent for a few moments, a strange expression crossing her face. "It's just... well, my father worked at the records office for many years. He used to tell me some stories about strange business dealings that happened in the past. The name Harrison sounds familiar. The lawyer who stole my family's land was named Octavius Harrison." "Octavius Harrison," repeated the nurse thoughtfully. "My father mentioned that name sometimes, always with a sour look as if he were a bad person." The next morning, Mrs. Dorothy insisted the family stay a few more days, claiming Sophia still had a fever and needed medical care. Rebecca accepted gratefully but insisted she would continue working at the bakery so as not to be a burden. During one of those afternoons, while Rebecca was at work and Mrs. Dorothy was watching the children, a social worker named Brenda arrived at the door. "Good afternoon. I received a report that there are children living in inadequate conditions in this area. Do you know of any family in this situation?" Mrs. Dorothy's heart raced, but she remained calm. "What kind of inadequate conditions?" "According to the report, a woman is raising 5 small children inside a tree in the nearby woods." "That's absurd. Who would do such a thing?" The nurse reacted with convincing naturalness. "That's what I'm trying to find out. Are you sure you don't know anyone in this situation?" At that moment, Emily appeared in the living room, playing with Sophia. Brenda observed them carefully. "What beautiful children! Are they your granddaughters?" "No, they're the daughters of a friend who's working. They're staying with me for a few days because their mother is between houses. You know how it is." "I see. And where were they living before?" "With their grandmother, but the poor lady passed away recently. Now the mother is looking for a place to rent." Brenda took some notes and left, apparently satisfied with the explanations. But Mrs. Dorothy was worried. Someone had made a specific report about the situation in the tree. When Rebecca returned from work, the nurse told her about the social worker's visit. "Someone knows about you in the tree, Rebecca." And she went to get the authorities. Who could it have been? It could have been anyone who saw them in the woods, or someone from town who suspects you aren't really living anywhere. The situation was getting complicated. Rebecca knew she couldn't stay indefinitely at Mrs. Dorothy's house, but she also couldn't go back to the tree with the risk of another visit from social services. It was then that the nurse made an unexpected proposal. "Rebecca, how about you stay right here? This house is too big for an old woman alone, and I've enjoyed your company." "Mrs. Dorothy, I can't accept that. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're a dedicated mother going through a hard time. I know you work hard and don't want anything for free. We can make an arrangement. You help with the housework and I help with the children when you're working. But what if the social worker comes back? We'll say you're a friend who needed temporary help. It's not a lie. That's exactly what you are." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Rebecca accepted the proposal with tears in her eyes. For the first time since Michael left, she felt she wasn't completely alone in the world. Mrs. Dorothy became more than a host. She became a substitute grandmother for the children and a true friend to Rebecca. With the housing situation temporarily stabilized, Rebecca could focus on the land issue. Mrs. Dorothy helped her research at the county clerk's office to find out who the current owners of the lands listed in the old documents were. The discovery was shocking. Most of the land currently belonged to a law firm called Harrison and Associates, whose senior partner was Reginald Harrison. The surname was no coincidence. Reginald was the grandson of Octavius Harrison, the corrupt lawyer who had stolen the Mitchell family's lands decades ago. "So the grandson is benefiting from what his grandfather stole," commented Mrs. Dorothy indignantly. "And now, how am I supposed to face a law firm being just a simple cleaner?" "First, you are not just a simple cleaner. You are the rightful owner of these lands. Second, we'll look for an honest lawyer to represent you." The problem was that the few honest lawyers in town charged fees Rebecca could never afford. The cheaper ones didn't inspire confidence, and some even suggested she drop the case, claiming it would be impossible to prove the fraud after so long. It was Mrs. Dorothy who had the idea of seeking out the regional public defender's office. There, they met Dr. Paul Henry, a young and idealistic public defender who was immediately interested in the case. "Mrs. Mitchell, if these documents are indeed authentic, you have a solid case. I'll need to have the papers examined and investigate the historical records, but I can represent you free of charge." "Do you really think I have a chance?" "I believe you were victims of a crime that was never properly investigated, and it is my duty to ensure justice is done, even if it's decades later." Dr. Paul began working on the case with dedication. He discovered that several other families in the region had lost land in a similar way around the same time, always involving the law office of Octavius Harrison. The pattern was always the same. They took advantage of the owner's departure or vulnerable condition to forge fake sales. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued working at Mr. Benedict's bakery, saving every penny she could. The children were adapting well to life at Mrs. Dorothy's house, attending school regularly and regaining the weight loss during the difficult weeks in the tree. But the peace didn't last long. Reginald Harrison had found out about the investigation and decided to act. One day, while Rebecca was working, he appeared at the bakery. "Are you Rebecca Mitchell?" "I am. How can I help you?" "I'm Reginald Harrison, an attorney. I heard you've been spreading stories about lands that supposedly belong to your family. Rebecca felt her stomach turn upon hearing the surname, but she maintained her composure. I'm not spreading any stories. I'm just claiming what is rightfully mine. Look, Mrs. Mitchell, I came here in good faith. I know you've been through hard times, lost your husband, were left without a home. I have a proposal for you. What proposal? I can offer you 50,000 Ries for you to forget this story about the lands and move on with your life. It's enough money for you to rent a good house and support your children for a good while. 50,000 Ries was a lot of money for Rebecca. It could solve all her immediate problems and give stability to her children, but something about Reginald's demeanor bothered her. And why would you do that if the lands don't truly belong to my family? Because I'm a generous man, and I don't like to see children suffering. Accept the proposal, Mrs. Mitchell. You won't find a better offer. I'll think about your proposal. Don't take too long to think. Offers like this have an expiration date. That night, Rebecca told Mrs. Dorothy about Reginald's visit. The nurse was suspicious. If he's offering money, it's because he's afraid of losing much more. 50,000 Ries is pocket change compared to the real value of those lands. But it's a lot of money for me, Mrs. Dorothy. It could give my children a better life. And do you think Michael would be proud of you accepting crumbs for what is rightfully yours? The mention of her late husband touched Rebecca deeply. Michael had always been a man of integrity, who taught the children to fight for what was right, regardless of the difficulties. Dr. Paul Henry, what do you think of Reginald's proposal? She asked during an appointment at the public defender's office. I think it's proof that our case is solid. Nobody offers 50,000 Ries for someone to drop a lawsuit that has no basis. But what if I lose the case? I'll be left with nothing. Mrs. Mitchell, the examination of the documents confirmed they are authentic. We have witnesses from that time who confirm the crimes of Octavius Harrison. The chances of winning are excellent. Even so, the pressure increased every day. Reginald began to use more direct intimidation tactics. He sent investigators to follow Rebecca and discover details about her life. That's how they found out about the period when the family lived in the tree. Mrs. Mitchell, said Dr. E. Paul Henry during a tense meeting, I need to warn you that Reginald is trying to use your past situation against you. He will argue in court that a woman who let her children live inside a tree is not competent to manage valuable properties. But I only did that because I had no choice. I know, and we will prove that, but be prepared for them to try to tarnish your reputation. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Rebecca wore the nicest clothes she owned, borrowed from Mrs. Dorothy. Her hands trembled as she held the documents that could change her life forever. Reginald arrived accompanied by a team of expensive lawyers, dressed in impeccable suits. The contrast with the simplicity of Rebecca and Dr. Paul Henry was stark. The judge, Dr. Severus, was a middle-aged man with a reputation for being fair, but strict. Your Honor, began Dr. Paul Henry, my client was the victim of a crime that has been perpetuated for generations. The documents we present prove unequivocally that the lands in question were obtained fraudulently. Reginald's lawyer, Dr. Marcus, immediately countered. Your Honor, what we have here is a desperate attempt by a woman who cannot support her own children. A woman who, as our documents prove, went so far as to shelter 5 small children inside a tree in the woods. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn with shame, but Dr. Paul was prepared. Your Honor, my client was forced to make extreme decisions precisely because she was deprived of her legitimate inheritance. Had she been in possession of the lands that are rightfully hers, she would never have endured such a situation. The judge examined the documents carefully. The technical analysis had confirmed that the papers were genuine and indeed dated from the 1940s. Dr. Marcus, how does your client explain the existence of these documents? Your Honor, old documents can be forged or misinterpreted. Furthermore, my client acquired these lands in good faith, through a legitimate purchase registered with the county clerk. A legitimate purchase of lands that had been obtained fraudulently by his grandfather, countered Dr. Paul. We have here a letter from my client's great-grandmother denouncing the fraud at the time. It was then that Dr. Paul presented his secret weapon. He had found other descendants of the families harmed by Octavius Harrison and all were willing to testify about the historical crimes. Mrs. Edith, an 80-year-old lady, took the witness stand with difficulty but determination. "Doctor, I remember Octavius Harrison very well. He deceived my father too, stole our family's lands with false papers. My father died of a broken heart, never able to prove the fraud." Mr. Joseph, 75 years old, told a similar story about his family, and so on, forming a clear pattern of criminal activity that had been covered up for decades. Reginald grew visibly nervous during the testimonies. During a recess, he tried one last gambit with Rebecca. "Last chance, Mrs. Mitchell. $100,000, and you forget all of this." "I refuse," she replied firmly. "I wouldn't accept $1 million. This land belongs to my family, and my children have a right to their inheritance." When the hearing resumed, Dr. Paul made his final argument with passion. "Your Honor, what is on trial here is not merely land. It is justice delayed for decades. It is the right of an honest family to recover what was stolen from them by a corrupt system that perpetuated itself through generations." Dr. Marcus attempted a defense based on technicalities, claiming statutes of limitations and the Harrison family's good faith. But the facts were too irrefutable. The judge withdrew to study the case and returned 2 hours later. After carefully analyzing all documentation and hearing the witnesses, it is clear to this court that there was indeed a crime of misappropriation that extended for decades. The lands claimed by the plaintiff are legitimately her property by hereditary right. Rebecca felt her legs go weak. Mrs. Dorothy, who was in the audience, began to cry with emotion. "Therefore," continued the judge, "I order the immediate restitution of the lands described in the case file in favor of Rebecca Mitchell and her descendants, as well as payment of compensation for the years of improper use of the properties." Reginald turned pale. His lawyers were already whispering about appeals and motions. But Dr. Paul knew the victory was secured. The facts were indisputable, and the documentation was too solid to be overturned in higher courts. Outside the courtroom, Rebecca hugged Dr. Paul and Mrs. Dorothy, still not fully believing what had happened. "Does this mean I'm rich?" she asked, still confused. "It means you've recovered what was always yours," replied Dr. Paul. "And yes, that land is worth a great deal of money today." During the following weeks, while awaiting the completion of the legal proceedings, Rebecca continued working at the bakery and living in Mrs. Dorothy's house. She didn't want to tell the children about the radical change in their lives until she was absolutely certain everything was settled. Reginald tried every possible recourse, but he lost at every turn. The evidence was too strong, and the town's public opinion was on Rebecca's side. The story had spread, and many remembered the old crimes of the Harrison family. It was then that something no one expected happened. Mrs. Dorothy, who had become an essential part of the family's life, revealed a secret she had been keeping for weeks. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something," she said one afternoon, as they had coffee on the porch. "What is it, Mrs. Dorothy? You look strange." "It's about my father. Remember I told you he worked at the notary's office and knew the Harrisons' history?" "I remember. Well, actually, he didn't just know the history. He was an accomplice to Octavius Harrison." Rebecca nearly dropped her coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "My father was the clerk who falsified the documents for the sale of your land. He told me everything before he died 10 years ago. He was consumed by guilt, but it was too late to do anything." "Mrs. Dorothy, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid you would hate me. My father took part in stealing your family's land. I've felt guilty ever since I learned your story." Rebecca was silent for a few moments, processing the information. Then she stood up and hugged her friend. "Mrs. Dorothy, your father's crimes are not your fault, and you have done far more for my family than you had any obligation to do. But it wasn't just out of kindness, Rebecca. It was also out of guilt. I wanted to help correct the injustice my father helped commit. It doesn't matter. You saved my family when we needed it most. That's what counts." The revelation brought unexpected relief to Mrs. Dorothy, who had carried the weight of guilt for years, and it strengthened the bond between the two women even further, now united by a story that transcended their own lives. 3 months after the court decision, Rebecca finally received official ownership of the land and the first installment of the compensation. The amount was enough to change their lives completely, but she made a decision that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Dorothy, I want to buy your house." "What do you mean, Rebecca?" "I want you to keep living here, but as our partner. We're going to turn part of the land into a social project for families going through situations like ours." "Are you sure about this?" "I am. I've learned that suffering has no meaning if it doesn't teach us to help other people suffer less." Emily, now 11 years old and more mature than she should be for her age, fully approved of her mother's idea. "Mom, remember when you said we would find a way out of that tree?" "I think the way was learning that we can be happy by helping other people too." Rebecca felt her chest swell with pride. Her children had learned valuable lessons about resilience, dignity, and generosity during the difficult months. The social project was named Roots of Hope, in honor of the century-old fig tree that had sheltered the family in their most difficult moment. The tree was preserved as a symbol of the place, and a support center for families in vulnerable situations was built there. Reginald Harrison, defeated in all legal instances, had to return the land and pay a multi-million-dollar compensation. Part of the money was used to build simple but dignified houses for families who had nowhere to live. Another part was invested in a fund that would ensure the project's sustainability for decades. Dr. Paul became the official lawyer for the project, offering free legal counsel to the assisted families. Mr. Benedict joined the initiative, creating a community bakery that operated as a cooperative. Mrs. Dorothy found fulfillment as the medical coordinator of the project, attending to needy families and training community health agents. Her experience and wisdom became fundamental to the initiative's success. Rebecca Mitchell's children grew up involved in the social work, learning from an early age the value of solidarity. Daniel became interested in law, inspired by Dr. Paul's work. Sophia showed a talent for caring for other children, following in Mrs. Dorothy's footsteps. Christopher developed manual skills, helping with the construction and maintenance of the houses. Emily became a natural leader, organizing activities for the community's youth. Nathan, the baby who had nursed at his mother's breast inside the tree, grew up without remembering the difficult times, but always hearing the stories about the importance of never giving up on dreams and always helping others. 5 years after the first night in the fig tree, Rebecca was at the place where it all began, showing the tree to a group of journalists who wanted to tell the story of the project. "It was here that I discovered that sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to find the strength we didn't know we had," she explained, touching the tree trunk affectionately. "My children and I entered here as broken people and left as a stronger family." One of the journalists asked if she didn't feel anger toward the Harrison family for what she had been through. "At first I did, but I learned that anger would only hurt me more. I chose to transform pain into purpose. Every family we help here is a victory against the injustice I suffered." "And your children? How do they handle the story?" "They learned that problems can be big, but our ability to overcome them is always greater, and that when life takes something from us, sometimes it's to show us we can build something even better." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, at the 5-year ceremony of the Roots of Hope project, over 200 people gathered around the century-old fig tree. Families who had benefited from the project, local authorities, journalists and supporters celebrated the results achieved. Rebecca, now 40 years old, was unrecognizable from the desperate woman who had arrived at that spot years before. Her hair was well cut. She wore simple but good quality clothes, and most importantly, her eyes shone with a confidence born from the achievements obtained through struggle. "When I arrived here 5 years ago," she addressed the crowd, "I had nothing but my children and a desperation that seemed endless. Today I look around and see that desperation has turned into hope for dozens of other families." Emily, now 16, watched her mother's speech with pride. She had become a mature and responsible young woman, helping coordinate the project's educational activities. Her siblings were also present. Daniel, 13, already talked about studying law to follow in Dr. Paul's footsteps. Sophia, 11, always caring for the project's younger children. Christopher, 10, showing talent for carpentry and construction. And Nathan, now 6, running among the trees with other local children. Mrs. Dorothy, at 70, had found a new purpose in life. Her house had become the administrative center of the project, always full of people coming to seek help or offer support. The guilt she had carried for years over her father's crimes had transformed into motivation to do good. "You know, Rebecca," she commented after the ceremony, "sometimes I think fate wanted our paths to cross. My father participated in the injustice that struck your family, and I was able to participate in the reparation of that injustice. Mrs. Dorothy, you've said that 1,000 times. What matters is what we did together, not what our ancestors did apart." Dr. Paul Henry, who had followed the entire journey from the beginning, was present at the celebration with his wife and young children. Rebecca's case had marked his career and strengthened his conviction about the importance of the Public Defender's Office. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "this case changed how I see the practice of law. I learned that sometimes a lawsuit isn't just about winning or losing, but about restoring people's dignity. Dr. Paul, without you, none of this would have been possible. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." Mr. Benedict, who continued running his bakery but now also coordinated the project's food cooperative, approached the group. "Rebecca, my dear, who could have imagined that the desperate young woman who came to ask me for work would become one of the most respected people in St. Rita Hills? Mr. Benedict, you were the one who gave me my first opportunity when everyone looked at me with suspicion. I'll never forget that." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a new family to the project. It was a young woman with 2 small children, in a situation very similar to what Rebecca had faced years before. She approached hesitantly, carrying a bag with the few belongings she possessed. "Excuse me," said the woman. "I heard that you help families who have nowhere to stay here." Rebecca immediately recognized the look of desperation and shame in the woman's eyes. It was the same look she herself had had years ago. "What's your name?" she asked kindly. "Amanda, and these are my children, Luke and Brittany." "Amanda, you've come to the right place. Let's talk and see how we can help you and your children." As they walked toward the support center, Rebecca remembered her own arrival at that place. The difference was that now Amanda didn't need to take shelter inside a tree. There were houses available, medical assistance, legal support, and most importantly, people who understood her situation without judgment. "Amanda," said Rebecca, "I know exactly what you're feeling right now. The feeling that the world has ended, that you've failed as a mother, that there's no way out." "That's exactly it," replied the woman with tears in her eyes. "But I can guarantee one thing. This will pass. You will discover strengths you didn't know you had, and your children will learn life lessons that children who have never faced hardship will never learn." Emily joined the conversation, offering to look after Amanda's children while the mothers talked. "Luke, Brittany, would you like to see where you're going to stay?" she asked affectionately. The children, initially shy, soon became animated by the teenagers' attention. Emily had developed a natural talent for dealing with traumatized children, perhaps because she herself had lived through similar experiences. In the following weeks, Amanda went through the same welcoming process that the project offered to all families. She received a simple but dignified home, medical assistance for herself and her children, legal support to resolve her legal problems, and most importantly, the understanding of people who had been through similar situations. Rebecca became a mentor to Amanda, just as Mrs. Dorothy had been for her. The cycle of mutual help that characterized the project was constantly renewed, with people who had been helped becoming supporters for new cases. "Rebecca," asked Amanda after a few months in the project, "how did you manage to turn your suffering into something as beautiful as this?" "At first I didn't think about transforming anything. I just wanted to survive and protect my children. But I learned that when we go through great difficulties, we have 2 choices. Let them destroy us, or use the experience to help other people." "And wasn't it hard to forgive the people who hurt you?" "It was very hard. I spent years unable to think about the Harrison family without feeling anger. But the anger was consuming me from the inside. One day, I realized my children were starting to absorb that bitterness, and I decided I couldn't let other people's wickedness contaminate their purity." This conversation happened on a special afternoon. It was the 6th anniversary of the first night the family had spent in the fig tree. Rebecca made a point of marking this date, not as a moment of suffering, but as the beginning of her transformation. Every year on this date, she would take her children to visit the tree and tell the story again of how it all began. It was a way of keeping alive the memory of the difficulties overcome and the importance of never giving up. "Mom," asked Nathan, now 6 years old, "why did we have to sleep inside the tree?" "Because sometimes life tests us, my son. But the tree wasn't just a place where we slept. It was the place where we discovered our treasures." "What treasures?" "The treasure of the documents that were buried which gave us back our inheritance, but mainly the treasure of discovering that we are stronger than we imagined." Daniel, now 14, added, "Nathan, it was here that we learned that a united family can overcome anything." Sophia, 12, added, "And it was here that we met Mrs. Dorothy, who became our grandmother in our hearts." Emily, 17, and already showing adult maturity, concluded, "It was here that we understood that our problems were small compared to our ability to overcome them." Christopher, 11, and always practical, laughed. "And it was here that we discovered that sleeping in a bed is much better than sleeping on the ground." Everyone laughed at the boy's observation, but Rebecca took the opportunity to offer a deeper reflection. "Children, I want you to always remember that no matter how difficult a situation may seem, there is always a solution. It may take time to appear, it may require a lot of effort on our part, but it always exists." "And what if we don't find the solution?" asked Nathan. "If we don't find the solution, it's because it hasn't arrived at the right time yet. But while we wait, we can become better people and help other people who are going through the same thing we went through." This philosophy had become the unofficial motto of the Roots of Hope project. It wasn't just about providing temporary shelter for families in difficulty, but about transforming broken people into stronger, more compassionate people. The project's results had drawn attention beyond St. Rita Hills. Other towns in the region began to replicate the model, always with the consultancy of Rebecca and her team. What had begun as a solution to a personal problem had transformed into a methodology for social inclusion. Dr. Paul had documented the entire legal process of Rebecca's case and was writing a book about how to use the legal system to correct historical injustices. The case had become a reference in law schools as an example of perseverance and proper use of the public defender's office. Mrs. Dorothy, even at 70, had gone back to studying. She was taking a social management course to improve her ability to coordinate the medical aspects of the project. Her energy and dedication inspired people much younger. Mr. Benedict had expanded his food cooperative and now provided meals for 3 social projects in the region. He had become an example of how small business owners can contribute to the social development of their communities, but not everything was roses. The project constantly faced financial, bureaucratic, and political challenges. Some sectors of the local society still viewed Rebecca Mitchell's social ascent with suspicion and questioned the legitimacy of the project. Councilman Edward, a local politician tied to real estate interests, had tried several times to question the regularity of the project's activities at the city council. He argued that a disguised invasion was being promoted on lands that should be destined for urban development. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said during a public council session, "with all due respect to you and your family, we cannot allow sentimentality to interfere with the progress of our city." Rebecca requested the right to reply and approached the microphone with serenity. "Councilman Edward, I respect your opinion, but I completely disagree. What do we call progress? Building more buildings and shopping malls, or building a fairer society where families don't have to sleep on the street? You are being demagogic. Urban development generates jobs and tax revenue, and social development generates better prepared citizens and a stronger community. The taxes you mention are also paid by people who leave the margins of society and secure decent jobs." The debate extended over several sessions, but public opinion was largely on Rebecca's side. The families benefiting from the project mobilized to defend its continuity, and popular pressure was enough to maintain the activities. This episode taught Rebecca an important lesson. Her fight had not ended with the recovery of the land. It was necessary to fight constantly to maintain and expand the achievements obtained. "Emily," she said to her daughter after one of these council sessions, "do you see why it's important to study and prepare for life?" "I do, Mom. When I grow up, I want to continue this work you started. And I'll study law to legally protect the project, added Daniel. I want to be a doctor like Mrs. Dorothy to take care of people, said Sophia. I'll be an engineer to build better houses, declared Christopher. Nathan, always the most spontaneous, concluded, I'll be whatever is needed to help. Rebecca smiled with pride. Her children had learned the most important lessons: solidarity, perseverance, and social responsibility. They understood they had been privileged not by the money they now possessed, but by the experiences they had lived, and the opportunities to make a difference in other people's lives. The 7th anniversary of the first night under the fig tree was marked by a special celebration. The project had expanded to 3 neighboring municipalities and had already benefited more than 500 families. The methodology developed was being studied by universities and had sparked interest from international organizations. During the ceremony, Rebecca announced a new phase of the project, the creation of a technical school that would offer free vocational courses for young people from families in vulnerable situations. It's not enough to give the fish, she explained to the crowd present. We have to teach how to fish, and more than that, we have to teach how to care for the river so there will always be fish for everyone. The technical school would be built in an area adjacent to the project, utilizing the existing infrastructure. The courses would be focused on the real needs of the region: carpentry, sewing, basic computer skills, elderly care, and food production. Dr. Paul Henry, who now worked part-time at the project, would be responsible for establishing partnerships with local companies to guarantee internships and jobs for the graduates. Mrs. Dorothy would coordinate the elderly care course, drawing on her experience in gerontology. Mr. Benedict would offer the food production course, and Emily, even though she was still a teenager, would help with the basic computer course. "Mom," said Emily, "I have an idea for the school." "What idea, dear?" "How about we also create a community leadership course to teach other people how to replicate projects like this in their cities?" Her daughter's suggestion impressed Rebecca. Emily had developed a remarkable strategic vision for her age, a result of the early maturity developed during the difficult years and her constant exposure to social issues. "It's an excellent idea, Emily. Let's include that in the planning." The construction of the technical school mobilized the entire community. Families who had been helped by the project volunteered to assist with the work. Local business owners donated materials. Professionals from various fields offered to teach for free. Reginald Harrison, who after losing the lawsuit had left St. Rita Hills, made one last attempt against the project. He hired a law firm from a neighboring capital city to challenge the allocation of the land for social purposes instead of commercial ones. The lawsuit claimed that the social use of the land devalued neighboring properties and harmed the region's economic development. It was a desperate attempt to create difficulties for Rebecca, even without any real chance of legal success. Dr. Paul and his team easily refuted the arguments, showing that the project had actually increased the value of the entire region by reducing social problems and creating a safer, more organized atmosphere. "Your Honor," argued Dr. Paul in the new hearing, "what we have here is an attempt at revenge disguised as a lawsuit. The plaintiff has already been defeated in every possible forum and now tries to use the judiciary to persecute a family that has only exercised its legitimate rights." The judge had no difficulty dismissing the lawsuit and even admonished Reginald's lawyers about the improper use of the judicial system for purposes of harassment. After this final victory, Rebecca felt that a chapter had definitively closed in her life. There would be no more appeals, attempts at intimidation, or questions about the legitimacy of her achievements. "Dr. Paul," she said after the hearing, "I think I can finally say that justice has been served." "Mrs. Mitchell, justice has been served, but more than that. You have proven it's possible to transform an injustice into a force for good." At the inauguration of the technical school, 1 year later, Rebecca gave an emotional speech that summarized her entire journey. 8 years ago, I was a desperate woman who had nowhere to shelter her children. Today I am a fulfilled woman who helps other families find hope. The difference wasn't the money I won or the land I recovered. The difference was learning that our greatest tragedies can become our greatest victories if we are willing to transform pain into purpose. Emily, now 18 and about to enter university to study social work, was beside her mother on the stage. She had become a recognized young leader in the region and was already receiving invitations to speak about youth leadership in other cities. "My mother always says we need to plant trees whose shade we may never enjoy," she said in her part of the speech. "But I disagree a little. I think that when we plant trees of good, we ourselves already enjoy the shade during the planting." The tree metaphor had become the symbol of the project. The centuries-old fig tree that once sheltered the Mitchell family in desperation was now surrounded by a social complex, benefiting hundreds of people. Plaques scattered throughout the project told the story to visitors. One of them, placed in front of the fig tree, read, "Here a family discovered that the deepest roots are those that grow in adversity." Daniel, now 15, had become an excellent student and could already speak fluently about human rights and social justice. His personal experience with injustice had ignited in him a passion for studying law that impressed his teachers. Sophia, 13, dedicated every weekend to caring for the children who came to the project. She had developed her own techniques for dealing with childhood trauma and was already showing a calling for psychology. Christopher, 12, had become a little engineer. He actively participated in maintaining the project's houses and had already designed improvements that were successfully implemented. Nathan, 8, was the joy of the project. His charismatic personality and his personal story, he was born during the family's most difficult period, made him a sort of mascot who lifted the spirits of any newly arrived family. Mrs. Dorothy, 72, remained active and enthusiastic. She had become a regional reference in social assistance for the elderly and often received invitations to give talks on active aging. Mr. Benedict had expanded his cooperative so much that it now employed 20 people and provided food for social projects in 5 cities. He had become an example of how social entrepreneurship can generate sustainable economic development. Dr. Paul had been promoted within the Public Defender's Office and now coordinated a specialized unit for land rights. Rebecca's case had become a model of action that was being replicated in similar situations throughout the state. 10 years after the first night under the fig tree, the Roots of Hope project had become a national reference. Delegations from other countries came to learn about the experience and study the methodology developed. Rebecca, now 45, had transformed into a respected leader far beyond St. Rita Hills. She received invitations to participate in conferences on social development and had been asked to join the advisory board of an international foundation, but she never forgot her origins and made a point of keeping her feet on the ground. "Emily," she said to her daughter, who was preparing to take over the general coordination of the project, "do you remember when you asked me if we were rich?" "I remember, Mom. Now I can answer with certainty. Yes, we are very rich. But our wealth isn't in the money we have. It's in the lives we've managed to touch, the families we've helped rebuild, the love we've planted where before there was only despair." Emily hugged her mother affectionately. At 20, she had become an admirable woman, with a degree in social work and a specialization in social project management. Her natural leadership and personal experience perfectly prepared her to continue the work her mother had started. "Mom, I have a confession to make." "What confession?" "For a long time I was ashamed to tell people I lived inside a tree. I thought they would think we were a failed family. And now? Now I'm proud to tell that story. Because it proves that it doesn't matter where you start, but where you end up. And most importantly, how many people you help get there with you." This conversation took place on a special afternoon. It was the eve of the graduation of the first class from the project's technical school. 50 young people from vulnerable families were receiving professional certificates that would give them real job opportunities. At the graduation ceremony, Rebecca was invited to give the keynote speech. She stepped onto the stage nervously, still not completely accustomed to the public attention. "Dear graduates," she began, "today you are receiving much more than a professional certificate. You are receiving the key to transform your own stories. I know many of you come from families who have gone through difficulties similar to what my children and I went through. I know that sometimes you have felt ashamed of your origins, diminished by your circumstances. But I want you to understand one thing. Our origin does not define our destiny. What defines our destiny is our willingness to fight, to learn, and to grow from any situation. One of the graduates, Julian, 18 years old, asked to make a comment. Mrs. Rebecca, when my family arrived here 2 years ago, I was angry at the world. I thought life was unfair and that I would never have the opportunity to be someone in life. The carpentry course taught me a trade, but more than that, it taught me that I can build beautiful things with my own hands. Now I know I can build my future in the same way. Rebecca felt her eyes fill with tears. This was exactly the kind of transformation that gave meaning to all the work they had developed. Caroline, another graduate, also wanted to speak. Mrs. Rebecca, my mother always said that people like us didn't have the right to dream big. The computer course showed me that I can work with technology and even create my own projects. I'm already planning to develop an app to connect people who want to donate things with families in need. I want to use what I learned here to help other people. This was another aspect of the project that made Rebecca proud. Besides solving immediate problems, it encouraged people to become multipliers of solutions. After the ceremony, the graduates' families gathered for a celebration. Rebecca moved among the groups, talking to parents who had seen their children transform during the training process. Mrs. Rose, Caroline's mother, approached her with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Rebecca, how can I thank you for what you did for my daughter? Mrs. Rose, there's no need to thank me. You just need to be proud of her and support the dreams she is building. But I wanted to do something to give back. The best way to give back is to tell your story to other people who are going through hard times, to show that it is possible to get out of the hole, yes. This was the philosophy Rebecca had developed over the years. Each person helped by the project should become a beacon of hope for other people in a similar situation. At the technical school, there was a special room called the Stories Room, where families who had been helped by the project recorded videos telling their experiences and offering encouragement to those just arriving. Rebecca herself had recorded the first video in the series, telling her entire journey from that night under the fig tree to the creation of the project. That video went viral on social media and was responsible for attracting supporters from all over the country. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, she said in the video, and 10 years ago I was a desperate widow with nowhere to shelter 5 small children. Today I run a social project that has already helped more than 1,000 people. The difference wasn't a miracle. It was work, perseverance, and above all, the discovery that our greatest strength appears when everything seems lost. The video had been watched by more than 2 million people and generated hundreds of testimonies from people who were inspired by the story to overcome their own difficulties. One of those people was Amanda, who had come to the project years earlier with 2 small children and now coordinated a similar project in a neighboring town. Rebecca, she said during a visit, when I learned your story, I thought I could never do anything like it. Today I have my own project and I've already helped 50 families. Amanda, you always had that ability within you. You just needed to discover it. But it was by seeing your example that I found the courage to try. And now you are the example for other people. That's how the circle completes itself. This multiplication of the model in other cities was a source of great satisfaction for Rebecca. She didn't want the project to be restricted to St. Rita Hills, but to spread wherever there was a need. To facilitate this expansion, she had created a structured methodology that could be adapted to local realities. The manual Planting Roots of Hope was distributed free of charge to communities interested in replicating the experience. Furthermore, she offered free consultancy to groups that wanted to implement similar projects. Emily had specialized in this consultancy work and had already helped implement 15 projects in different states. "Mum," said Emily during one of her consultancy trips, "it's impressive how the foundation of the methodology works in such different realities." That happens because the foundation isn't techniques or procedures, my dear. The foundation is love, respect, and the belief that every person has the potential to overcome their difficulties. Exactly. And that is independent of geography, culture, or local economic conditions. Daniel, now 17 and about to start law school, had developed a special passion for the legal aspect of the project. He studied all the legal processes involved and had already drafted contract templates and protocols that facilitated the operation of new projects. "Mum," he said, "I want to specialize in social law so I can offer legal support to all the projects in the network." "Daniel, I'm happy you want to follow this path. But remember that the law is just a tool. What's important is what we do with it." "I understand. Dr. Paul taught me that a good social lawyer needs to have their heart in the right place, not just technical knowledge." Sophia, 15, had decided to study psychology with a focus on community psychology. Her sensitivity in dealing with trauma and her personal experience prepared her well for this area. "Mum, I want to study how to help families who have been through traumatic situations like ours. I think I can contribute a lot in this area. Sophia, you've always had a special talent for caring for people. I'm sure you'll be an excellent psychologist." Christopher, 14, continued to show talent for engineering and architecture. He had designed improvements for the project's houses that impressed experienced professionals. "Mum, I want to study social architecture. I want to create affordable housing projects that are functional, beautiful, and inexpensive." "Christopher, what a wonderful idea. Adequate housing is a basic right that many families cannot exercise." Nathan, 10, continued to be the joy of the project. His outgoing and charismatic personality made him an excellent ambassador for visitors and a source of positive energy for everyone. "Nathan," Rebecca would sometimes ask, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be just like you, Mom. I want to help families who are sad become happy again." "You already do that, my son. Every time you play with a new child who arrives here, you are helping them feel welcomed." The simplicity of Nathan's vision perfectly summarized the spirit of the project: to transform sadness into joy, despair into hope, loneliness into community. Mrs. Dorothy, at 74, remained active, but had begun to think about planning her succession in the project. She wanted to ensure the work would continue even after she could no longer participate actively. "Rebecca," she said during a conversation, "I need to start training someone to take over my part in the project." "Mrs. Dorothy, you're still more active than many people half your age." "I am, but I know it won't last forever. I want to make sure the project keeps growing even when I'm no longer here." "Have you thought of anyone?" "Actually, I've thought of Sophia. She has a natural talent for healthcare and a special sensitivity for dealing with trauma. But she's still very young." "Of course it wouldn't be now, but we can start involving her more in the care services so she learns gradually." This concern for continuity was constant in the project. Rebecca knew she had built something bigger than herself, and she wanted to ensure it would survive and grow regardless of her personal presence. To that end, she had established a management board made up of community representatives, specialized professionals, and people who had been helped by the project. This board made all the important decisions and ensured the project maintained its original principles. Dr. Paul Henry was part of this board and had helped structure all the legal governance to guarantee transparency and sustainability. Mr. Benedict also participated on the board, bringing the perspective of local economic development and income generation for the assisted families. Emily, though young, was already part of the board as a representative of the project's second generation. Her perspective was crucial for thinking about long-term strategies. "Mom," said Emily during a board meeting, "I think we need to consider expanding into urban areas too. The model was created with rural communities in mind, but there's a lot of poverty in the outskirts of big cities." "That's an interesting idea, Emily." "But urban dynamics are very different from rural ones." "Yes, but the fundamental principles are the same: dignity, opportunity, and community. We can adapt the methodology for urban realities." Dr. Paul Henry supported the suggestion. "Emily is right. I've already received several inquiries from urban communities interested in implementing the model. We can develop an adapted version." This was a defining characteristic of the project. It never settled for its achieved successes, but always sought new ways to expand its positive impact. During the 12th anniversary of the first night in the fig tree, Rebecca announced the launch of a new phase of the project, the creation of a national Roots of Hope network that would connect all similar projects spread across the country. The time has come to take the next step, she announced to the crowd gathered for the celebration. We cannot be content with solving local problems while families are suffering in other regions. The national network would be coordinated by Emily and would have the technical support of partner universities. The goal was to create a system for sharing experiences, resources, and best practices among all the projects. Daniel, now 19 and already in college, would be responsible for the network's legal support. Sophia, 17, would coordinate aspects related to psychosocial care. Christopher, 16, would lead infrastructure and sustainability issues. Nathan, 12, would continue being the original project's ambassador of joy. Family, Rebecca said after the ceremony, do you realize how our story connects with the stories of hundreds of other families? I do, Mom, replied Emily, and it makes me think that our experience in the tree wasn't just about us. It was about planting a seed that would sprout into hope for many other people. Exactly. And now that seed has become a forest. Mrs. Dorothy, who was listening to the conversation, added, and the most beautiful part is that every tree in that forest is generating its own seeds. The project is multiplying naturally. Mr. Benedict, always practical, observed, and each new tree is bearing fruit, jobs, dignity, opportunities. It's a virtuous cycle that feeds itself. Dr. Paul Henry, who had become almost a member of the family over the years, concluded, you've proven it's possible to use the legal system and available resources to create real social justice. It's not just about winning cases, it's about transforming lives. This collective reflection always happened after the project's major milestones. It was a way to keep everyone connected to the original purposes and to assess whether the chosen paths remained aligned with the core values. A tradition Rebecca Mitchell had established was to visit the century-old fig tree whenever she needed to make important decisions. She considered the tree her place of reflection and gratitude. Whenever I come here, she explained to visitors, I remember where we started and how many people believed in us when we didn't even believe in ourselves. The tree had become an informal pilgrimage point for people who heard the project's story. Many left notes with thanks or requests for strength to overcome their own difficulties. Rebecca made a point of reading all these notes and, when possible, personally responding to people who left contact information. One of the letters that moved her most was from a woman named Helen, from another state. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm a widow like you were, and I have 3 small children. I'm going through a very difficult time and have thought about giving up many times, but when I learned your story, I understood that if you managed to get out of such a desperate situation, I can too. Thank you for giving me hope again. Rebecca personally replied to the letter and put Helen in touch with the Roots of Hope project nearest her city. 6 months later, she received another letter. Mrs. Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you. The project here in my city helped me get a job and a decent place to live with my children. More than that, it gave me back my self-esteem and my will to fight. Now I'm a volunteer with the project and I help other mothers in similar situations. One day I want to meet you in person to thank you. Stories like this constantly reached the original project. Each one reinforced Rebecca's conviction that the suffering endured by the family had a greater purpose. Emily, she said after reading Helen's letter, sometimes I think if we hadn't gone through those difficulties, we would never have developed the necessary sensitivity to help other people. I think the same thing, Mom. Our experience of pain has become our greatest tool for doing good. Exactly. And that makes me question whether we should really call that period suffering. Perhaps we should call it preparation. This perspective had become central to the project's philosophy, not to deny or minimize the difficulties experienced, but to reframe them as preparation to better serve others. During the 13th anniversary of the first night at the fig tree, Rebecca made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced she was stepping back from the day-to-day coordination of the project to dedicate herself to the national expansion of the network. The time has come to make space for the new generation, she explained during the ceremony. Emily is more prepared than I am to lead this phase of the project, and I need to focus on helping other communities implement their own projects. Emily, now 23 and with a postgraduate degree in social management, officially assumed the overall coordination of the original project. Her first decision was to create a youth council to ensure the voices of new generations were always heard. Daniel, a law graduate specializing in social law, assumed the legal coordination of the national network. Sophia, studying psychology, became responsible for developing psychosocial care protocols. Christopher, studying social architecture, led sustainable infrastructure projects. Nathan, at 14, continued to be the ambassador of joy and had begun developing communication projects to promote the network's work. Mrs. Dorothy, at 76, became a senior consultant for the network, offering medical and gerontological guidance for all partner projects. Mr. Benedict expanded his cooperative to serve the entire network, creating a solidarity economy system that connected producers from different regions. Dr. Paul was promoted within the Public Defender's Office and created a national unit specialized in social rights, offering free legal support for similar projects across the country. "Rebecca," said Dr. Paul during the transition ceremony, "do you realize you've created a social movement that transcends the original project?" "I didn't create it, Dr. Paul. We all created it together. Every person who believed, every family that was helped, every volunteer who dedicated their time. This is much bigger than any single person. But it was your initial courage that made it all possible. My courage and the desperation that forced me to be courageous," laughed Rebecca. "Sometimes we need to be pushed to discover we know how to fly." This humility had remained intact throughout all the years of success. Rebecca never saw herself as a heroine, but as someone who had been placed in circumstances that demanded the best from her. With the new organizational structure functioning, Rebecca began traveling across the country, visiting communities interested in implementing similar projects. Her method was always the same: spend a few weeks in the community, meet the local leaders, understand the regional specificities, and adapt the methodology to the local reality. In every place she visited, Rebecca insisted on meeting the families in the most vulnerable situations. She wanted to understand their stories, their specific needs, and especially their potential. "There is no family without potential," she always said. "There are families without opportunity. Our work is to create those opportunities in an organized and sustainable way." During one of these trips, in the north of the country, Rebecca encountered a situation that touched her deeply. A riverside community had lost their homes due to changes in the river's course, and dozens of families lived in precarious conditions in makeshift shacks. "Mrs. Rebecca," said the community leader named Ramona, "we've tried everything. We've sought out the government organizations, but no one offers a definitive solution." "Ramona, tell me more about this community's history. How did you live before the flood?" "We lived from fishing and subsistence farming. Each family had their house, their garden, their boats. It was a simple life, but dignified." "And now?" "Now we depend on donations to eat. The men go to work in the big city and come back from time to time. The children don't have a proper school. People are losing hope." Rebecca spent 2 weeks in the community, sleeping in a borrowed hammock and eating the same food as the local families. She wanted to deeply understand the reality before proposing any solution. She discovered the community had abundant natural resources, valuable traditional knowledge, and people willing to work. What they lacked was organization, technical training, and access to markets for their products. "Ramona," she said, after studying the situation, "you don't need charity. You need opportunities to use what you already know how to do." "How do you mean, ma'am?" "You know how to fish better than anyone in the city. You know how to make flour, acai, handicrafts. You know how to navigate the rivers, you know the forest. All of this has economic value. But how do we turn this into money to support the families? By organizing production, improving quality, creating our own brands, and finding customers who value traditional and sustainable products." The project implemented in that community was different from the previous ones, adapted to the riverside reality. Instead of traditional houses, modern flood-resistant stilt houses were built. Instead of agriculture, the focus was on sustainable fishing and processing forest products. The technical school offered specific courses: navigation and water safety, fish processing, acai production, traditional crafts with improved techniques. Within 6 months, the community had organized a cooperative that sold products to the regional capital with its own brand and origin certification. Family income tripled, and many young people who had migrated to the city returned to work in the community. "Mrs. Rebecca," said Ramona during the inauguration party for the community center, "you didn't just bring hope. You helped us remember that we always had value. We just needed to organize it better." "Ramona, I didn't bring anything that wasn't already here. I only helped you see it with different eyes." Experiences like this were repeated in dozens of different communities: urban slums, rural settlements, indigenous communities, quilombos, cities affected by natural disasters. Each reality required specific adaptations of the methodology, but the fundamental principles remained the same: dignity, opportunity, community, and sustainability. After 3 years traveling across the country, Rebecca decided to systematize all these experiences into a book that could guide others interested in social work. "Emily," she said, "I think the time has come to write about everything we've learned." "What kind of book, Mom?" "A practical book that teaches ordinary people how to identify social problems in their communities and organize sustainable solutions." "That's an excellent idea. I can help with the project management part." The book, Planting Hope: How a Family Transformed Pain into Social Purpose, was written collectively. Rebecca told the main story. Emily contributed management aspects. Daniel addressed legal issues. Sophia wrote about psychosocial care. Christopher focused on sustainable infrastructure. And even Nathan contributed a chapter on the importance of joy in social projects. Mrs. Dorothy wrote about community healthcare. Mr. Benedict addressed local economic development, and Dr. Paul contributed guidance on how to use the legal system to defend social rights. "Dr. Paul," asked Rebecca during the writing process, "do you think it's worth retelling our personal story in the book?" "I think it's fundamental, Mrs. Rebecca. People need to understand that great social transformations begin with ordinary people facing real difficulties." "But I'm afraid they'll think I'm promoting myself." "On the contrary, telling your story shows that anyone can be an agent of social transformation, as long as they have the courage to start and the persistence to continue." The book was launched 15 years after the first night in the fig tree. The launch ceremony took place under the very tree, with representatives from all projects in the national network present. "This centuries-old tree," said Rebecca in her speech, "was here long before I was born and will remain here long after I'm gone. But I'm sure our passage here has left deep roots that will continue to nourish hope for many generations." Emily, now 26, and coordinating a network of over 100 projects spread across the country, added, "Mum, when we were children and slept inside here, you always said everything would work out. I don't think even you imagined how right everything would turn out." "I really didn't," admitted Rebecca. "But I always believed that if we fought with honesty and persistence, some solution would appear." Daniel, now a graduate and practicing as a lawyer specializing in social law, added, "What impresses me most is how our personal story connected with the stories of thousands of other families. It's as if our experience was a seed that germinated into hope for so many people." Sophia, a recently graduated psychologist specializing in family trauma, observed, "And most importantly, our children grew up seeing that it's possible to overcome any difficulty when we have love, family unity, and a willingness to help others." Christopher, an architect in training and already responsible for planning the network's sustainable infrastructure, said, "Mum, I remember when you used to say we were going to build something beautiful with our own hands. I think we built something much bigger than houses. We built communities." Nathan, now 17 and studying social communication, concluded, "And we built all of this without losing joy. I think that's our greatest achievement, showing that it's possible to transform suffering into shared joy." Mrs. Dorothy, at 79 and still active as a network consultant, was moved by the testimonies. "Rebecca, when I met you and those children that afternoon in the woods, I never imagined I would witness such a beautiful transformation. You taught me that it's never too late to discover new purposes in life." Mr. Benedict, now coordinating a network of cooperatives serving more than 50 municipalities, added, "Rebecca, my dear, you proved that small acts of solidarity can generate great social transformations. Your family has become a family of thousands of people. Dr. Paul Henry, who had become one of the country's leading specialists in social law, concluded, "Mrs. Mitchell, your case changed my way of practicing law. I learned that law is not just about statutes and lawsuits, but about using legal tools to build a fairer society." The book became a bestseller and was translated into other languages. Universities began using the Roots of Hope methodology as a case study in social work, public administration, and community development courses. International organizations invited Rebecca to share the experience at conferences on poverty eradication and sustainable development. But she always made a point of bringing representatives from the communities benefiting from the projects so they could speak for themselves about their transformations. "It is not I who should speak about overcoming poverty," she would always say. "Those who should speak are the people who have lived this overcoming in practice." During one of these international conferences, Rebecca met representatives from communities in other countries facing problems similar to those she had experienced. The idea emerged to create an international network of similar projects. "Emily," she said after returning from the conference, "I think our methodology can be adapted to other cultural and economic realities. Mom, it would be amazing to be able to contribute to solving social problems in other countries, but we have to be careful not to impose our cultural view." Exactly. It would be an exchange. We would share our methodological experience, and they would share their specific cultural solutions. The international network Roots of Hope was launched 2 years later, connecting similar projects in 15 countries. Each project maintained its autonomy and cultural specificities, but shared experiences and best practices through a collaborative digital platform. Nathan, now a graduate in social communication, became responsible for the digital coordination of the international network. His language skills and charismatic personality made him an excellent ambassador for the project on a global scale. "Mom," he said during a video conference with representatives from all partner countries, "it's incredible to see how our story here in rural Kentucky is connected with stories of people on the other side of the world. Nathan, that happens because the need for dignity and hope is universal. No matter the country, culture, or religion, all people want to have opportunities to build a better life for their families." 20 years after the first night in the fig tree, Rebecca, now 55, decided to reflect deeply on the entire journey. She called a family meeting under the centuries-old tree to talk about the future. "Family," she said, "the time has come for us to think about our definitive succession in this work." Emily, now 28 and recognized as one of the country's leading social leaders, replied, "Mom, you are still at the peak of your capacity. Why think about succession now?" "Because we have built something bigger than ourselves, Emily, and something of this magnitude cannot depend on specific people to continue existing." Daniel, now an established lawyer and recognized expert in social law, agreed. "Mom is right. We need to ensure the network survives and grows regardless of our direct participation." Sophia, a specialized psychologist and coordinator of psychosocial care for the national network, added, "And we have to think about the next generations. Our children need the freedom to choose their own paths, even if different from ours." Christopher, a trained architect responsible for the environmental sustainability of all projects, observed, "Mom, I think the time has come to create an institutional foundation that guarantees the perpetuity of the work." Nathan, a social communicator and international coordinator for the network, concluded, "And we have to better document our entire methodology so that other people can replicate it without depending on our direct guidance." The decision was made as a family. The Roots of Hope Foundation would be created, an independent organization that would assume the coordination of the entire national and international network. The Mitchell family would maintain participation on the board of directors, but operational control would be transferred to specialized professionals and representatives of the beneficiary communities. "Dr. Paul," asked Rebecca, "would you agree to take on the presidency of the foundation? It would be an honor, Mrs. Mitchell, but only if you all maintain active participation on the board." "Of course. We want to make a transition, not an abandonment. Mrs. Dorothy, at 81, would be named honorary president of the foundation. Mr. Benedict would assume the coordination of economic development. Emily would become executive director, with Daniel as legal director, Sophia as director of psychosocial care, Christopher as director of sustainability, and Nathan as director of communication and international expansion. The foundation's creation ceremony took place on the 21st anniversary of the first night in the fig tree. Representatives from more than 200 partner projects were present, along with government authorities, representatives of international organizations, and hundreds of families who had been helped over the years. 21 years ago, Rebecca said in her keynote speech, a desperate family took shelter inside this tree, thinking they had reached the end of the line. Today, more than 10,000 families have gone through similar projects spread around the world, discovering that there is no end of the line when we have the courage to start over. The event was streamed live online to all partner countries, symbolizing the global dimension the project had achieved. Emily, officially assuming the executive directorship of the foundation, made a public commitment. I take on this role with the responsibility of keeping the flame of hope that my mother lit here alive. I promise we will work so that no family in the world has to sleep rough for lack of opportunities. Daniel, as legal director, announced the launch of an international social advocacy program. We will create a network of lawyers specialized in social rights, offering free legal support for vulnerable communities in all partner countries. Sophia presented the new psychosocial care protocol. We have developed an emotional care methodology that respects cultural specificities but offers effective support for trauma related to poverty and social exclusion. Christopher revealed the Environmental Sustainability Project. All network projects will have specific environmental goals, proving it is possible to fight poverty without harming the environment. Nathan announced the creation of the Global Digital Platform. We will launch a specific social network that will connect families benefiting from similar projects worldwide, creating a global community of mutual support. End of story. Dear listener, did this story touch your heart? Leave in the comments where you follow us from, and tell us if you have ever been through a difficult situation that you managed to overcome. Your experience may inspire other people. If you liked it, leave your like and subscribe to the channel.